There was an article recently that said Catholic priests give the shortest homilies. Not tonight. Hey, don't cry just because I'm going to give a long homily. So I recently visited a classroom of middle school students. We talked about some of the issues in middle school, which led us into a conversation about sin and free will and happiness and holiness and heaven. I explained that authentic happiness occurs when we use our free will to obey God and follow God's plan for us. Well, this led to one of the students remarking, that life, that doesn't sound like much fun. I asked her, well, do you think you can find happiness by sinning? And she thought about it for a few moments and said, yes. Well, we might dismiss her answer because she is young, but her yes has been the yes of every person of every age from the beginning of time who has thought and acted in the belief that sin leads to happiness. Well, after 15 years of hearing confessions and having gone to confession for more than 50 years myself, I can say with great certainty that this is a lie. Sin does not lead to happiness. It may produce fun, but sin can never produce authentic happiness. Well, then why do we all sin? Why do we need Christmas? We need to go back to the beginning, the book of Genesis, in which we read that God created the human person in his own divine image and likeness. God created us intentionally and with great love. God never desires anything bad for us, but only desires the best for us, including our ultimate good, heaven, which is the perfection of happiness. Therefore, God never, ever wills us to sin or tempt us to sin. Rather, God calls us to be holy as God is holy, to be perfect as God is perfect. So if God does not will us to sin, well, where does that inclination to sin come from? Well, in order to be created in God's image and likeness, God gave us the gift of free will, the ability to choose for or against the good, the ability to sin or not sin, which leads us to our first parents, right? Adam and Eve. They had everything. They were living the good life, the perfect life. Beautiful gardens, perfect, good, great food, no sin, and best of all, they had the company of God. They were living authentic happiness. And then the evil one entered the garden and tempted Adam and Eve with the promise to be like God, to make them think that the happiness they were currently enjoying could be better, that God was somehow hiding something from them, that there was more to life than all this beauty and peace they were enjoying. Please notice that God did not tempt them, but allowed the temptation. God did not want them to sin, but permitted them to sin. And sin they did. Eve and then Adam exercised their freedom and disobeyed God by eating of the forbidden fruit. Their sin did not lead to happiness. Their first move was to run away from God when he came looking for them, to hide from the one who loved them and gave them everything. When God finally found them and questioned them about their sin, their first move was, he made me do it, she made me do it. And later, Cain, one of their sons, filled with jealousy and anger, killed his brother Abel. And so it has been throughout history. The temptation to sin has always plagued the human person, and all but Mary and Jesus have used their freedom to say yes to that temptation. Therefore, that middle school student's remark that sin can lead to happiness is not just the response of a 12-year-old girl from White Bear Lake in 2019, but the response of every human being of every age, time, and place. It's a repeat of the big lie that Adam and Eve first heard in the garden. And that's why God sent judges and prophets and kings to reveal and to rebuke that lie, as recorded in the Old Testament. But the lie continued, which required Christmas. It required Christmas if God's plan for all people to enjoy heaven with him was to be fulfilled. Since the original sin was caused by human beings, God chose that a human being must restore creation. And therefore, God became man in the person of Jesus on that first Christmas. He was obedient in all things, even in death. The obedience of Jesus overturned the disobedience of Adam and Eve and sinners of every time and place, and made it possible for us to achieve our ultimate happiness, perfect communion with God in heaven. This act of love and mercy fulfills the prophecy of the prophet Isaiah we heard in our first reading. The people who walked in darkness, all of us have seen a great light. For you, God, have brought them abundant joy and great rejoicing, for a child is born to us. Jesus is the way that leads to the Father, that way that leads to heaven and to authentic happiness. As followers of Jesus, we are to imitate him. As St. Paul writes to Titus today, we are to reject godless ways and worldly desires and to live justly and devoutly, eager to do what is good. That's a description of saying no to that big lie and saying yes to God and happiness. And we are told, don't hold this good news to yourself. Jesus has been given to us as a gift. We're supposed to give him away. We are to share that gift with others in our families, at school, work, church, in the public square through lives of service. But the greatest opportunity for happiness on this side of heaven, the Mass. Jesus is present to us, and boy, is he present to us in the community gathered tonight. He's present as the word is proclaimed. And most beautifully, Jesus is present in the Eucharist, hiding under the appearance of bread and wine, as it were, like he hid in the stable in Bethlehem. Many people no longer believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. So on this night, as we gather together, let me say it with the weight of 2,000 years. The bread and wine offered at Mass become the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. The same Jesus who came to us at Christmas 2,000 years ago, the same Jesus who suffered and died on the cross, the same Jesus who rose from the dead and now reigns in glory in heaven. The Eucharist we are celebrating is a participation in the heavenly banquet. It's a taste of the happiness that awaits us. And our happiness and our desire for heaven will be increased in the measure we worthily participate in the Eucharist, in here, and put the Eucharist into practice out there. We receive the gift of Jesus, and we give it away out there. And the more we give Jesus away, the greater our happiness. God promises. Therefore, on this eve of Christmas, I repeat the words of the heavenly host. I proclaim to you good news of great joy that will be for all the people. A Savior has been born for you, who is Christ and Lord. Let us all follow the parish mission. Know Jesus more deeply, follow him more closely, and go forth to share him more generously. This is the recipe for happiness.